Hello, everyone. This is Justin Cobb coming to you from Arlington, Virginia, USA. And today I have this wonderful guest who is tuning in with us all the way out from San Francisco, California. Her name is Danielle Lee. Danielle, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. So, folks, I'm going to just give you a brief introduction to Danielle before we get started. Danielle is this amazing human who is doing her part to make a difference. She is involved in climate tech and green technology. She's an advocate. She is heading the way in terms of making sure that green technology is a part of our sustainable development and our future. And I'm going to open the floor now so that way Danielle can share more about it and the work that she is doing. Danielle, please feel free to share.
Yeah, thanks for that intro. Super happy to be here. Just to, I guess, to give you a little bit of background on me, I come from the climate tech space, as you mentioned. Spent the last 5-ish years working on like EV charging solutions, a couple of other different energy startups, and other energy projects. And now what I'm doing is building a community in the Bay Area centered on forging relationships amongst young change makers to inspire agency over climate action. So definitely quite a large pivot from the very like tech focused work I was doing. Now doing a lot of community building, also doing content creation. So yeah, completely different world now, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
I mean, it's a beautiful pivot. Yeah. Honestly, who is better to do this work other than people who have been in the climate tech space? Not only do you all have like the scientific know-how, but especially if you're capable of building community, which is so needed, there I say bring in the best of all worlds and make it happen. And that's one of the things I love about the work that you're doing now with your content creation, for sure, Danielle.
Thanks so much. Yeah, definitely it's not, if you'd asked me like 2 years ago if I would be in the position I'm in today, I would never have guessed it, but it's been really amazing. And yeah, I think the work that I did in climate tech really has informed a lot of the work I'm doing now in surprising and unexpected ways, and it's been great.
All right, so let's go ahead and hop in the time machine, shall we? We're gonna go back a little bit. What was it like for Danielle growing up? And what were you witnessing and encountering? And how did that inspire you to get involved in the work that you're currently doing now?
Totally. So I'm Korean. I was raised in a Korean family. And we grew up moving around a lot. And I spent quite a bit of time in Southeast Asia, in my like younger years, adolescent years. And it was really my experience there, like living in Vietnam, living in the Philippines, where I witnessed just ecological devastation as a result of like not just industrialization, but also like extreme weather events like hurricanes, really bad typhoons. And seeing that at a very young age greatly influenced and informed the work I'm doing today. Like it's probably the reason I'm doing the work I am doing today. I think just at a young age, coming to the realization that there were a lot of things happening to our environment that were affecting people and people's livelihoods, people's lives, in really horrible ways. It just made me want to learn more about the problem and learn about solutions that I could be a part of creating and implementing. So that was a lot of my, I guess, origin story when it comes to climate.
I want to spotlight this for a moment. I'm sure you've already picked up on this, but in case audiences you missed it, Danielle's a coastal gal. Like she's out in San Fran now, and then Korea and the Philippines and all these other places in Southeast Asia are all on the coast or have major coastlines, which are all going to be tremendously impacted by climate change in the next, I mean, now, but also in the 50 plus years that are about to come as the issue continues to evolve. So walk me through a sense of, since you did answer that, but I want to get a sense of how does like being a part of all these coastal communities shape a lot of your understanding of what's about to come?
That's a good question. I think a lot of what you mentioned around when we talk about climate change, or at least when the media talks about it, one of the biggest things, the consequences of climate change that comes up is sea level rise and the fact that coastal communities are going to be gone if, assuming, you know, we don't do anything or we don't intervene from like a mitigation or adaptation perspective. So I think that's been on my mind quite a bit. I would say probably the other thing that I don't know how coastal, I don't know how relevant it is to the coastal piece, but definitely relevant to California is the wildfires. That's not something I experienced until I moved to the US when I started college in 2016. And so just experiencing horrible air pollution, seeing the sky turn color, those are all really, really scary things. And I know that as I've talked to other people who've kind of gone on their own climate journeys, finding themselves in climate jobs, a lot of people call out like the wildfires in 2020 and in the Bay Area that really led them to feel called to pursue a career in climate. But yeah, that's definitely been something else notable that I think a lot of Californians can probably agree is incredibly scary. Of course, the LA wildfires just happened too, which were horrifying. And so yeah, it's really devastating to just see all of this unfold. And but it almost it reiterates like the fact that this work needs to be done even more. And so it's always really hopeful whenever I talk to people that are like really passionate about finding solutions to climate and just really dedicated to implementing them as hard as they can be.
Yeah, and you mentioned that climate journey that other people who have gone on this and came to their own conclusions about it. So I'm curious now, tell us more about Danielle's climate journey. What was that like? What were you experiencing throughout that process?
Totally. Yeah. I would say my interest in climate stems from a young age, but the way I guess my start in climate work itself really happened when I moved to the Bay Area. I went to Stanford for my undergrad and was kind of just like dropped into the world of climate tech. I think if anyone goes to school in the Bay, they probably have come across some sort of like tech X, whatever other industry adjacent field, and climate is definitely no exception to that. There are amazing, innovations and technological innovations that are coming out of the Bay, which is really exciting. And I was super, super excited by the promises of the impacts of tech and how it would transform the solutions that we were implementing in really, really meaningful ways. And so that's really how I got my start. I took classes, I got involved with different communities on campus. I started working part-time for different energy startups, charging startups. And that was really where I got my start. I will say that I think during my time in these spaces, my interest in climate tech was definitely reinforced over time because I loved the energy. I loved the people that were operating the space. Everyone was just so passionate and well-intentioned and really eager to combat the climate crisis. And so post-college, I pursued a career in climate tech and really had a great experience. I think over time, however, I started to get a little troubled by the mismatch between the promises of impact that climate tech would deliver and what was actually unfolding in real life. And I think one of the big realizations I came to was the fact that a large part of the successes of the climate tech industry hinges upon the ability and the willingness of Fortune 500 companies to follow through on their voluntary net zero or sustainability commitments. And as I started reading a little bit more into that and seeing, okay, Microsoft, Apple, all these really big companies and brands, they've made these bold commitments and we are kind of praising them for them. How are they doing in that progress? It was very, very shocking when I discovered that the progress was not being made and that, if anything, a lot of these companies, their emissions are only on the rise. And so I think as I started thinking more about that, I began questioning, okay, how meaningful is the work that I'm currently doing? How meaningful is the work that I could be doing in a similar role in climate tech? Are there other solutions or pieces to the puzzle that I'm missing? And There definitely are other pieces to the puzzle that I wasn't really thinking too much about, but now I'm thinking a lot more about when it comes to like policy action, when it comes to communities and the role of communities and relationships in shifting social norms, which is such an important yet ambiguous thing, which is why I think a lot of people tend to focus on like very concrete, like, okay, this tech is going to create XYZ impact. And so, yeah, now that's, I mean, like through this journey, I, started meeting a lot of people in the community resilience and the community building and the activism space, which was like a whole new world to me. And it was really, really inspiring to see people who cared so deeply about the problems, but were addressing them in such different ways, in ways that I honestly hadn't even thought about before. And where I'm at now is really just trying to address needs that I'm seeing in my community where, there's so many people working on technological innovations, on climate tech startups, all of that. There are not a lot of people who are working on the community side of things, especially taking a relationship-oriented approach to community building. And I just saw like a gaping hole of like, okay, there's a need for this. Someone needs to do it. And so I just figured I would start. And so that's sort of a long-winded answer to what my journey's been like.
No, I appreciate that because you touch on so many key aspects. And one of the things that came to my mind while you were answering that, I'm curious because a lot of people, they, like you mentioned, we see a lot of these corporations and all these other organizations, they have their sustainable goals that they list to the public. And they mention like, oh, we want to go, as an example, not every company says this, but say company X decides to go net zero by 2050 or something. And that is their goal. But then you mentioned actually doing the homework. You see that they have even taken the first steps in doing that. How does one do the homework and finding out so that how a company is or some sort of entity is trying to follow through on those initiatives?
Totally. Yeah. I think you're kind of touching on a lot of things that are super important. So I'm glad that you're asking this. What comes to mind is the role of media in sharing accurate, important stories, information and stories about climate action and what is greenwashing versus what is not. I think what I've seen in climate media and climate communications, a challenge I've seen is that two of like the larger narratives that maybe overwhelm these like smaller stories that come up really look like one being all of the physical damage that climate change causes, like, oh, there's a wildfire, there's a hurricane, there's a flood, all these things, and a lot of the coverage being about that, which is super important, like, don't get me wrong. And then the second thing is really focused on like, oh, these companies, there's this problem that we have, and these companies are doing XYZ things to fix, their part in causing the problem. I think what I've seen hasn't been told as much, or maybe because stories are a little like adding nuances and adding more complexity to stories is always just more difficult to convey to people who increasingly are looking for short like snippets and tidbits of information, which can only really be like half-baked answers. I think it's difficult to be communicating really easily, like, okay, this company is saying that they're doing all these amazing things, but on the surface, but when you kind of peel back the onion, you can really see that there's a lot of hypocrisy or there's a lot of greenwashing behind the actions that they're taking. So it's like, their words are not matching their actions. There are some really great resources that like art, like media publications that are making really great content. Like Heat Map comes to mind, Grist comes to mind. Canary Media also has some great stuff. So I would say, turning to reputable sources that people trust that are sharing those other stories is super important.
Important because a lot of people, when we're talking about holding companies and entities accountable toward their promises that they're making around the climate action, the climate solutions, how else can you actually hold them accountable if you don't follow up and if you don't do the homework and seeing hey, this company promised this, but have they actually delivered on this? Because otherwise it's just a empty promise, and oftentimes, as you kind of touched on, a lot of those can fall flat or fall empty.
For sure. And I think one argument that I came across pretty recently from this like corporate sustainability leader and climate activist named Auden Schendler that really kind of changed my views on what corporate climate action looks like and should look like is the argument basically that he lays out is that corporate sustainability efforts have gotten so wrapped up in addressing a company's individual impact or their own carbon footprint or their own emissions that they've caused and reducing that as much as possible. But there's never going to be enough people or organizations that care enough where emissions are going to fall to a point where we will be staying within these temperature targets that scientists have done tons of modeling on and have outlined, okay, this is going to lead to X outcome, this is going to be safe, this is going to be not so safe. And so what he advocates for is, okay, given these voluntary efforts are not cutting it, and that this story that the sustainability community has been telling for the last 3 decades is not true, because we haven't seen the follow through on these promises. We need to act on creating systems level change, changing the structures we're living in that are causing such an outsized amount of emissions and warming to be happening in such a short period of time. And so like the two things that he really advocates for that I has honestly just like really shaped the way I'm thinking about climate action is advocating for policy and like political action, and then shifting like the narrative and shifting social norms and like eroding the social license that oil and gas companies have to continue operating in the ways that they're operating. So yeah, that just, I want to share that because it kind of something you mentioned really tied into that. So I guess like I say all that because it's almost like companies can and should start thinking a little bit bigger when it comes to the impacts that they can be having, and thinking beyond, okay, what is my own personal emissions, and thinking about, okay, like how can I affect change that influences everything and like the broader system and society around me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And a lot of the things that you're talking about as well, it's like there's so many challenges, and it just
So
like
many.
and it just when you think like, oh my gosh, we're almost there, we made it, it's like something else comes along and it's like, well, here we go, we're back to square one. What are your experiences with some of the challenges that you've faced around your activism and your advocacy around climate change?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? I will say I'm like much newer to the activism world than a lot of like my peers who've been at this for a really long time, and so they're amazing. Challenges that I faced over the last 6 months, year of this work. I think there's the one big challenge comes to mind, which is, and it kind of it materializes in different ways, but the fundamental challenge being people's like actions not lining up with their intentions or what they say they care about. So that like that mismatch shows up in that's just like part of life, right? That's like part of like who we are as humans. Like we're people that are filled with contradictions. So it's not a surprise by any means. The ways I've seen it come up have been talking to corporate sustainability leaders and them just talking about the fact that like, hey, we hear that, for example, Gen Z and millennials really care about the employers that they work for and the companies and brands that they're supporting, and that their mission and values aligned. But the spend and the purchasing decisions that these generations are making are not, they're not matching up, right? Like people are buying unprecedented amounts of like Shein and Temu packages, which are like the complete opposite of what we would think are mission and value aligned brands. So that's like one way it materializes. I think the other way it materializes is when I see, okay, actually, no, I think that's the main way. And now that I think more about this, the second challenge that I've seen is I've met over the last like year, I've met so many incredibly passionate and like well-intentioned people who want to make a difference in climate. And their immediate conclusion is, okay, I need to get a climate job in climate tech because that's going to be the way that I make the most amount of impact. And while I don't think that that's necessarily false, I think that the challenge that narrative maybe needs to inspire a little bit more of is thoughtfulness when it comes to what impactful climate action looks like. And the reason I'm saying this is because that's something I totally like fell for. And I've seen a lot of like I've had many conversations with other people who like were in the similar position and were like, yeah, I never really thought about my theory of change or what I thought was actually impactful. And I just kind of absorbed what people were telling me and took it at face value. And I think the reason why that's a problem is because people can often end up doing not so meaningful work at companies that are not really doing much for the climate, but are maybe branding themselves as this like amazing climate organization. And I think, yeah, there just needs to be more like thoughtfulness and kind of places where people are able to ask these questions to others that they trust and they want to engage with and really come to terms with, okay, like if this is, my understanding of, the current situation we're in and how I believe we're going to be able to get to a better place as it comes to like society, when it comes to the environment, these are the things that I can do to achieve that. And here's why I believe this is the best thing to do. I think incorporating that thoughtfulness is something that's really hard to do because it takes a lot of time and effort for people to be thinking about these things. And everyone's really busy and tired with their lives. Like life is hard. So that's a huge challenge.
And it doesn't show any signs of getting any easier anytime soon.
No.
Welcome up, folks. We're in for a ride. Let's go. But, oh my God. What you're talking about is true in the sense of we have all these people, and it's not just in the climate tech space. There are so many people. You see the reports, you see the statistics where they talk about how people are not happy in their jobs. And as great as I would love for us all to say like climate tech is the exception. I am willing to bet that if anything, climate tech is actually filled with people who are dissatisfied with their jobs to a certain extent. And a lot of it comes from the fact that we as a collective, as a society, we have put so much meaning and so many values and ideas into what it is that the job is supposed to look like, and what it's like, how much money we're supposed to make on it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here saying like you need to starve. That's not what I'm saying. Make money, go ahead and do that, like do your thing. Like there's bills that need to be paid out here, but I tell people all the time that we have unique skill sets and abilities and experiences as people because we were meant to use those gifts and abilities and skills for something greater in service to something that is a bit bigger outside of ourselves. One of the hashtags we love to use on the Insight is hashtag own your gifts, because it's about finding your talent, your skill set, and using that in service of something bigger and better. And I feel like a lot of the work that a lot of people have found themselves trapped in these days, and Danielle, if you feel otherwise, feel free to challenge me, but at least from what I'm gathering, it seems like there's a whole lot of people across industries who are just stuck and they don't feel that passion. Like they don't feel alive in the workplace and they don't feel challenged and connected.
Interesting. I think that that's definitely true at a high level. I will say the people that I've met in climate tech definitely have higher job satisfaction than people who are working in like management consulting or banking or another, like a more traditional industry. Because the work that they're doing by and large is meaningful and impactful in a positive way to society and to the environment. I think it's really a matter of, and so, yeah, I think that that's for sure is true to like the large majority of people. I don't know how applicable it is to climate tech. I think my experience probably came from the fact that I didn't do a lot of questioning around my theory of change and what assumptions I was making as to why I thought certain things were more impactful than other things, and kind of just took everything at face value. And then when I was confronted with like, wow, I've made a lot of assumptions. Like, do I really believe in these things? That was the troubling piece. And I've met people who've done a lot of that thinking and still think climate tech is the best solution. I've met some people who have not done much of that thinking because it's the path of least resistance is to not ask these questions. These questions are like difficult, they're uncomfortable, they're not fun, they can be kind of depressing to be thinking about a lot. But by and large, I think from the people I've met and spoken to, I definitely think that there is higher job satisfaction in climate tech than
What
others.
were some of the assumptions? Because you mentioned that before.
Yeah.
What were those?
Yeah, I think the biggest assumption was that tech, and this kind of sounds crazy to me saying it out loud now, but because it's so obviously not true, but biggest assumption is like tech solutions are the best climate solution, and that, policy it moves too slow, things are not going to happen in like fast enough, and so we need to be relying on like free markets and technology, and building the best products for as cheaply as possible to like beat out the unsustainable alternatives in whatever industry or marketplace you're working in. So that was probably like the biggest assumption. I just like didn't think too much about like, okay, is this really true? Like, what evidence is there that indicates this is true, and what evidence is there that indicates this is not true? And I think as I started diving a little bit more into that, I just saw a lot more sides to the picture and realized how complex climate change is as a problem, and that complex systems problems require systemic solutions, not like band-aid fixes that seem really smart but are not actually causing much impact. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it does go into one of the questions that I was going to ask you too. It's like lessons. What lessons have you been learning from the challenges that you've been facing and encountering?
Yeah, I would say the biggest lesson that I've learned is how important community is, which is another crazy thing. It's not really something I thought too much about when I thought about climate work. I didn't really recognize, I didn't fully appreciate the value of community and having other people to learn from, to process what's going on in this like crazy world that we live in, to really challenge a lot of the assumptions that I was making and the views that I held. But over time, I've recognized like this kind of work is so difficult because you're kind of like, it's almost like a David and Goliath analogy. Like everything is up against people who are working climate, especially right now. That's how it feels like. And so the only way you can continue like fighting and continue the work is to be with others and to have like meaningful relationships with other people that are like, that care about the same things you do, that are working on the same things that you're working on, maybe in different capacities, but are still working on the climate crisis, and can be a sounding board to the questions, the doubts and concerns that you have, and just be able to like almost find power in the collective. That's definitely the biggest lesson I've learned.
We talk about community a lot on Insights, and I really do want to hone in on this for a moment, if we can, Danielle. The whole thing with community is so key, but how, like, with community, there's the feel good aspect of it, but then there's also how people don't realize, oh wow, this is actually difficult to build sometimes because of I don't know. There's all kinds of factors going into this, right? They talk about how social media is impeding community. They talk about how instant gratification in some cases with like our apps and our phones and everything is hindering that as well. But then social media has also done a great job at connecting all these different communities around the globe. Like because this is the space you're in now, is like building community around a topic of major concern that doesn't just impact people on the West Coast or California. It doesn't even just impact Americans. It's a global phenomenon that's going to, it, as it furthers and as it goes along, it will devastate entire communities.
Yeah.
Like, what has been your experience in building community around this major issue that we're facing?
In terms of the challenges that I've faced in building community, is that the main thing? Or okay. It's definitely not easy, because what community requires is, where community requires finite resources, the main one being people's time and energy, right? And that's something that I think most people safeguard very closely, because it's like, like you're protecting your peace. Like that is like something that everyone wants to do. And so it is difficult to do that, for sure. For many different ways. It's difficult to, convince people that coming out to something is worth their time or their money. It's difficult to get people to engage more than just having a surface level discussion. There's like all these challenges that come with community building. But on the other hand, it's also been one of the most gratifying things I've done, because as I've met more people who are like really, really leaning into community and are not just like expressing gratitude, but are sharing so much of their energy and their time to like walk through, maybe like, for example, their theories of change and why they believe that political action is the most effective form of climate action, or why they believe something else is more effective. Like those conversations are so invigorating, and they give me so much hope, and just leave everyone feeling like they've not only learned something, but they've like established like friendships, and that their time was really well spent. And so it's not easy for sure, but I think nothing in climate is easy. So I definitely, wouldn't I'm not shying away from this, and I would not encourage other people to shy away from it, because it's necessary and there's so many benefits to it.
Yeah. One would argue that half the reason why climate change got as big of an issue as it is today is because we were not leaning into community the way that we should have in the past.
For sure. I mean, I think people can make that people make that argument for like just the weakening of our democratic institutions, like lower civil, less, people being less civically engaged, people being, more, isolated, socially isolated, more lonely than ever. Like that has a huge impact on people's like well-being and lifespan, like, which is kind of insane to think about. Or even the fact that like being more isolated leads to having more polarized like opinions and views on things. Like it's, caused a lot of problems. It's scary.
Like we mentioned before, folks, no shortage of problems. But you know what? We also have beautiful humans out here doing this work and making sure that there is going to be a pushback to this, at least. There, like when we talk about all these lessons that you've learned, like I'm curious because you have, like, let's make this scenario, like somehow this happens, a younger version of you comes up to you and sees what you're doing, is proud of you and the work you're doing, but wants advice. What are you going to tell her?
Probably not to just like not be so anxious about everything, not to be so stressed about really insignificant things. That's probably advice that my former self would not take. Be like, okay, I'm still gonna be this way. But that's probably the biggest message. It's like, you should not lose sleep over these things that you're losing sleep over. It's not that big of a deal. And I think probably in addition to that, the second biggest thing would be think more critically about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Like, don't just believe everything people tell you. Like, really think and sit down and spend time assessing the assumptions you're making, the views that you have around the impact that you want to make. And because even though it takes a lot of energy and time and effort, you're not going to ever regret doing that. And I wish I had done that 10 years earlier. So that's probably another really big thing.
critical thinking folks get some.
Critical thinking.
Unfortunately, it seems to be severely lacking in a lot of cultures these days. But but we got this. We can do this. There.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about critical thinking is that it is a skill, and skills can be taught. And when skills are taught, they can also be nourished. How does one critically think? One critically thinks by not just assuming that the picture that is being presented to them is the full story, and staying curious. And even if you come to the realization that you agree with the story being presented to you, do your homework, know the facts, know the generalizations or the mistruths, so that way you can engage with other people about that topic as well, so that way you can be informed. It's so key. And a lot of what Danielle is doing is actually informing us and keeping us up to date with climate, with the community and organizing, something that we all are going to need in these spaces. And it's like the fact that we have community that cares about this too is actually hopeful and inspiring, because it reminds me that I'm not alone, and I'm not just sitting here on like a little island here in Virginia, just watching the world go up in flames around me, and I feel like the dog meme where the house is on fire and you're sitting with your coffee and everything is fine. But
No, it's, yeah, I think, yeah, that's honestly the best thing about working in climate. It's like the people and how amazing people are. They're just they're so great. People like you, so great.
well, thank you. With your like, you talked about the lessons, but what is keeping you going on the toughest days? We talk about community, and I know community keeps me going on my tough days, but I'm curious if there's anything more you want to add on that topic.
Yeah, totally. I mean, definitely community is keeping me going. I will say also being like understanding the needs that we're addressing very much keeps me going. And the way I think about that is kind of three main things. First one is creating a space where people are able to establish like genuine relationships with one another. I found that a lot of professional communities or affinity-based communities like climate communities, etc., typically index a lot for like networking and kind of more transactional conversations, which leave a lot of potential for collective action and coming together to make a sum greater than its parts on the table. Like kind of just leave that on the table. So yeah, again, really creating spaces where people are able to forge genuine relationships with one another and build trust with one another, because relationships and trust, all of those are like cornerstones to affecting any sort of social change, which is really where I think the work that we're doing is trying to focus on. So that's the first thing. Second thing is creating spaces and environments where people are able to have discussions about the impacts that they're having, their theories of change, and talk really critically about these things that not necessarily are controversial, but that are very like people have very different opinions on. Because I think having a diversity of opinions is super critical when you're coming up with any reason for why you think something is true or not. And the conversations that we've been facilitating, especially around like theories of change, have been so fruitful and so fascinating too, because it's just really been an enriching experience to learn about like why people believe things that they believe and how that can transform the ways that I or the ways that other people view climate action. And then the last thing is I think the lens that we talked about earlier around like social isolation and kind of anxiety and a lot of the feelings, the feelings of like being overwhelmed and being very anxious when people think about the climate crisis and not having an outlet to channel that energy towards. And so really like wanting to create spaces where people can come to and channel those feelings towards productive conversations where they're able to talk about how they're feeling, talking about, what's going on in the world in a safe space, especially now in an environment where it feels like, like global political corporate leaders are shying away from a lot of like topics that they used to, parade and laud for, public for people to, give them support over. And so yeah, that really keeps me going when I think about like, okay, we're creating these really critical spaces that are addressing these concrete needs. Yeah, it feels really good to be doing that.
A lot of your answers are segueing into a lot of stuff that I talk with people, and I mentioned how the outer world is a reflection of the inner world. So if the outer world is on fire, what is going on in our inner worlds? Like what's going on in our heads, our minds, our spirits? And if you literally look at the statistics, you see like ideation of death by suicide. You see like all these mental health disorders. They're on the rise. It's getting bad regardless of what your gender is, regardless of what your racial category is. It's getting horrible for people, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And then you literally see the rhetoric around us where people blame all these other groups for the reason why things are the way they are. And it really like and then you literally do have the world, which is on fire and flooding, and like the air is polluted, and people are like literally getting shuffled around all over the place because they have to move. And it's like, it's disastrous. But here we are. And one thing that I'm finding comfort in a lot of this is that there are people out there who are seeing the connections between all of these. And I'm just like floored by the fact that there are people out here building the community and getting like this advocacy going and off the ground. And even despite all these challenges, like yeah, so I'm just so appreciative of your work. And I'm curious, like when you mentioned before you didn't see yourself going into work like this before in the past. Like like what were the moments like? What was like the sit down moment where you said, okay, I need to make this pivot? Like, what was that like?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say I really appreciate that. And I think one thing you mentioned around doing this work despite the challenges, to me, the way I've been trying to reframe it is I'm doing this work because of these challenges. Like these challenges make this work even more critical and urgent. So definitely have a lot to like feel hope and optimism around. In terms of the turning points and kind of what I was experiencing when I was thinking about making this pretty big career shift, a lot of it came from a mindset shift that I experienced where I kind of, before I used to think a lot about the, like the notion of like, you stay in you stay in the lane that you're given, like, you know technology, or how to be a product manager. And so you just continue doing that, like double down on that. And I just like lifted my head up and started looking at the world around me and looking at what other people are doing, and realized like, okay, it seems like people are not putting all of these, it seems like not everyone, and at least not me, like I wasn't putting the pieces together as to like why policy was so important, why community work was so important, in addition to technological innovation, in addition to these other things. And honestly, once I started thinking more about like, okay, like challenging these notions of, oh, I can't do anything outside of what I'm doing now because this is all I know, I was just like, why can't I do these other things? If they need to be done, someone needs to do it. If we all thought that, we could only stick to the things that we currently know, no one would ever learn anything. So it was a lot of just like challenging my inner critic.
I love that. We need more of that too. Challenge that inner critic. You are worthy, people. You are worthy of anything that you set your mind to and you want to accomplish. I mean, look at what's going on. We got a bunch of people out here who think that they are worthy of taking over the planet. So if they can do it, why can't we be worthy of building a world where we share the planet? Like, I think like that's a beautiful dream. That's worth working towards. And the beautiful thing is, it's not just a few people working on it. So we got, come on, folks, we can do this.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. There's people who are dreaming bigger and are dreaming things that we don't want. So we need to dream bigger and dream things we do want. So yeah, no, I agree with that.
Oh my gosh. It's but when you think about this work that you're doing, it's like, I know people say like, oh, I want my work to be dedicated to this, or I want it to be dedicated to that. But let's say like down the road, you're looking back and older Danielle, she's got gray hair and she's like, I don't know, she's walking with a cane or something. I don't know. There, I'm not, but okay, regardless. She's looking back on her life. What kind of legacy are you hoping you're going to leave behind as you think about that?
That's a good question. Honestly, my legacy is not even something I've given too much thought towards, because I just want to make as much of a positive impact on like society and our environment as I can, and like do my best while at it, and also have a good time, and like be like a supportive and good person while I'm at it. And like if I do that, that's really all I can ask for. I'm not too concerned about what legacy I'll leave behind. I hope people just care more about the environment and care more about other people. That would be great.
Yes. Oh my gosh. All right. So I did want to leave the time for you to share more about your new projects that you got coming up. So Danielle, what do we have to be excited for?
Yes.
What does the public need to know? Let's go.
Yes. So I know I shared a lot about the community building work I'm doing, but we are planning to like officially launch the community as a nonprofit in the upcoming months. And so I'm super, super excited about that. I'm excited for us to be able to just make ourselves more known to other people who are working in the space, potential partners, potential like community members and people who want to dive into this work, and just, dip their toes into what it would look like to join a climate community, even if they don't work in climate, even if they, even if they just care and are really, really concerned and don't know what to do about it, but want to do something. I'm super excited about that. There's a lot that we are doing right now leading up to the launch, but we're planning on launching during SF Climate Week in April, during Earth Month, or during the week of Earth Day. And so we're super excited about that. But yeah, anyone who's working in the like climate community building or like social impact community building space, or people who are based in the Bay and kind of see a lot of or experiencing a lot of the challenges that we've talked about around like climate anxiety, around wanting a space where people they can grow in the ways that they're thinking about climate action and really hone in on what they think their theory of change looks like, and also just build relationships with people that are not so focused on like transactions and feel so like quid pro quo-esque. Would love to talk to anyone who falls into that camp.
Community folks, get some.
Get some.
Get some. Build connections, build relationships, and it's not always about like I've used this example in the past, but if you have a bag of flour and I need a bag of flour, and if I borrow that bag of flour or some of that bag of flour from you, that does not automatically mean I owe you a bag of flour. What oftentimes happens is sometimes you give somebody a bag of flour, and then somewhere down the line, it may even be the person you gave the flour to, but somewhere along the line, you get a bunch of cookies that are homemade, and it's beautiful and it's great. Like life has a mysterious way of making things work, and if when we show up for the things that we are capable of influencing and impacting, even if they do seem small, those ripple and those leave an impact, and they create changes that we need in our world. And Danielle and her community are going to do just that. I have full faith and confidence in it. Danielle, we're coming up on time. This has been so much fun.
No, thank you so much for having me. And one thing I was going to say on what you mentioned, like, doesn't everyone want homemade cookies? Like, shouldn't we just be investing in that future where we're all just being surprised with homemade cookies based on the bags of flour that we're giving people? Like, that'll be amazing. But yeah, thank you for doing this work to highlight people who are working in environmental work, working in racial justice, working in a variety of other things that are just making society a better place that we want to be part of. And yeah, no, this was great. I really appreciate you having me.
Of course. Before we go, for those folks who either want to get involved in your community, who want to collaborate with you externally, however that looks like, what's the best way to do that?
Me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn URL is LinkedIn /, Danielle Lee Climate, or you can reach out on Substack Climate Action Club.
I love that. And
wow, that was awesome. I'm so grateful that Danielle came on to Insight to share more about her and her journey and her work and the projects that she has coming up. It's fantastic, and I am so grateful that Danielle is here and that there are other people out there just like her who are doing their part to make a difference and build sustainable futures for us as a human species, as a planet, and yeah, I'm moved. I'll be sure to drop some links in the comments for you to check out her profile. Thank you, audiences, for tuning in to Insights. It means the world. Don't forget to subscribe and help us build the channel. And be sure to comment to let us know what you think. And don't forget to like and share us with your friends, your peers, your networks, you name it. Go ahead and do that. Be sure to check out our other platforms as well, including Medium and Spotify. You'll find exclusive content there that you won't find anywhere else. And be sure to stay tuned for more. There's plenty coming. Until then, be well.